everyone. A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope you all settled in. We have a very interesting evening today. Evening at my part of the world, though, and probably a good morning and good afternoon to different parts of the world. We have today actually a discussion on authenticity and traceability in the alcohol beverage industry, which seems to be a pretty different when I look at the other, web forums that we usually congregate with. But it promises to be very exciting and interesting, and probably a lot of information to be passed on to all of you. So I welcome all of you to this webinar hosted by Vlinder and We2 Verify. I'm Hemant. I'm the founder of a whiskey club in India called Smack. I'm joined by Uday Balaji, who are going to be the moderators for the evening. Uday is the managing partner in the Whiskey Advisor. Other members of the panel include, as you can see on your screen, Ashok Chokalingam, who is the head of distillation and at Amrit Distilleries, Umang Trivedi, who is from Amrit Distilleries again, Malini Srinivasan, who is the founder of Vlinder Labs, and Yash, who is the co-founder from We2 Verify. So I welcome you all for this discussion on authenticity and traceability in the alcohol beverage industry. So this session is divided into three sections, which is, firstly, we're going to be covering a discussion on current problems and challenges, followed by the state-of-the-art solutions that are going to be provided that are available to us today. And we're going to be wrapping up with the case study from Amrit Distilleries as to how this was put into implementation. So that's the basic agenda for the evening. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So let's go into the current problems, and Uday, please feel free to jump in discussing this first challenge of counterfeit. Now, when I'm reminded of counterfeit, the first thing that comes to my mind is the number of bottles that have been palmed off when I'm buying through auctions or when I'm buying through the web, when some rare bottle appears out of nowhere and I just want to probably own that bottle, and the hurried steps that I take to finish the transaction. So counterfeit is a subject that is very close to my heart. And when I say counterfeit in the alcohol beverage industry, what I actually mean is it's a problem not at one end of the spectrum. Now, usually one would associate counterfeiting bottles being to the higher end of the spectrum with regard to valuable bottles being traded for, in which counterfeiting would actually take place. But that's not the case. I mean, counterfeiting is a problem that happens across the board, right? We're talking about counterfeiting of daily drams and counterfeiting of any alcohol actually bottle, predominantly in developing countries that we have seen this. It's acute in the high value spectrum as such, but it prevails across the board as such. Now, before I go into anything else, I just thought that we would split this counterfeiting into two different sections. One is where you have a valuable high-end bottle which is counterfeited by actually removing the cork and putting other liquid in and putting in the foil back again. So that's one type of counterfeiting. The second type of counterfeit would be the mass production. And when I say mass production is they replicate the label, they replicate the bottle, and they have a separate production line itself which actually produces counterfeit goods, which is very, very detrimental to the entire industry and the brand as such. So Uday, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you have anything that comes to mind as when we talk about counterfeits?
I think what you said is absolutely accurate. The problem is across the board. So you have the high value bottles, of course, but the high volume, the lower priced bottles are a big issue, and you got to look at it from different perspectives as well. Because one is revenue loss, obviously. The companies are losing a lot of revenue, but also excise is losing a lot of revenue. And as most would agree on this call, when excise loses revenue, then there's a wider ramification involved here. But there's a big loss of trust that's happening here with the customer. And we live in a world where it's not like, 10, 20 years ago where these are isolated instances that could just pass by. These days, any video, and you've all seen this of raids and counterfeiting, that's just gone viral. And nothing spreads like bad news and scandalous news. So it's definitely something for brands to look at. And also, one thing that shouldn't be forgotten is the societal impact, because you don't know what's
Very
going
true.
into these spurious liquor bottles, particularly at the lower end, and the health issues. So it's something that needs to be tackled, and there's a lot more urgency, because information is spreading so rapidly, right? One video
True.
gets taken today and it's seen across the world in minutes. So yeah, that's what I feel about it, Hemant.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. Uday. Thanks for bringing that up in terms of the health issues that actually that we come across every now and then because of these counterfeit bottles being circulated in the public and the brand impact as well. Now, interestingly, I have with me on the panel Yash, who is well known for his collection of bottles. Now, Yash, I want to actually involve you in this discussion per se, and you collect a lot of bottles and you are a well-known collector across the world. Now tell me, as a collector of rare and, fine whiskeys, give me a quick background of what is some of the challenges that you have faced in terms of collecting. Because as I said a couple of minutes back, I have been palmed off some fake bottles when I'm buying quickly over the internet, over the auctions, and so on and so forth. But what are the kind of problems that you have faced as a seasoned collector, if I may say so?
Thank you, Hemant. Right. So I've come across quite a few counterfeits, in the journey of my hobby. It's also, I've got bottles from auctions that have turned out to be counterfeit, although auctioneers have dealt with it completely, in a nicer way. And I've got my full refunds and everything. But nonetheless, even auctioneers do mistakes.
All right. There is no way of validating that at that moment. That's what you mentioned, right?
That's right. There isn't.
Okay. Right. So counterfeiting is a big problem, and this is something that we really need to tackle at the earliest. And we're looking for a reliable solution, because at that moment, if you don't have authenticity, I don't know how we're going to judge our future purchases over the internet, over the auctions, or even as to how auctioneers are going to be able to validate what's being produced as counterfeits. But yeah, that's a story that we're going to dwell in. Now, moving on, I guess, Uday, over to you to talk about the grain to glass story.
So, just like Hemant said, he's something that's very close to his heart is counterfeit. Something very close to my heart is the grain to glass story, because it's all about storytelling, right? And make no mistake, we're in the middle of a whiskey boom right now. This is across the world. I read somewhere that whiskey is being produced in over 82 countries. It's an explosion of distilleries, over 2,000 distilleries in the US, and the explosion that's happening in India as well. But the thing is, the customer is just getting bombarded by everything from like a small craft distiller to the biggest distillery brands. And it's not just distillery, there are a whole bunch of new sourced brands as well out there. So when a customer goes to the store, how are they going to choose, right? So it's all a question of how does that brand tell its story genuinely? Because we also live in a world where people have traveled, people want to know where the clothes are coming from, the food is coming from, the toothbrush is coming from. So they definitely want to know where the whiskey is coming from, and they want a way to know, is this story genuine, or is it just some marketing spiel that is being put forward? So I think anybody who has some sort of method to tell the story genuinely and verifiably, I think is definitely going to be differentiated from the rest of the crowd, in my opinion. But Hemant, you had a few thoughts on this as well. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, so Uday, I think so. Great points that you made. And whenever people talk to me about story, I think so that's the essence of every whiskey that we produce and every whiskey that's probably revered across the world. Story plays a very, very important point. The point that I had in mind is there has always been, you know, let's say a differentiation between the digital footprint of a brand and the actual physical product of the brand. Now, when I say that, I mentioned, there's the bottle that one produces, which is the physical product, which actually reaches the end customer. We are talking about the whiskey out here. And then there's the digital portrayal of the brand, the story, etc. They're two different spheres, actually. There's no conjoining of these two spheres, and this is probably something that I always, because there's a limited real estate on the label of the bottle, there's a limited information that you can actually pass through. Booklets are a passe, people don't want to read them anymore. So yes, I think so that's one area that is there's a huge scope for improvement as to how well can a brand actually tell its story when they're talking about the production, grain to glass, so on and so forth. The other thing that, I thought that was very important is in terms of the penetration levels. Now, there are a lot of people who isolate themselves in terms of your social media. They don't want to get onto any of the social media. And probably I follow any kind of whiskey across the globe. So I may not be loyal to one specific brand or a set of brands as such. So how do I engage with all of my customers to tell them the story to ensure that my penetration levels of communicating what I have to in terms of story is improved? I think so that's also one of the key areas that I think is existing today for there.
That was really nicely put, talking about how the mapping of the digital footprint to the physical footprint needs to happen, because everybody's got a story. There's a question of how do they get it out and get it out effectively is something that you mentioned in your second point. But I thought somebody who could give us a little more perspective on this as well is Kunal Madan, who's the Assistant Vice President of International Business at Radico Khaitan. And Kunal handles iconic brands now like Rampur and Jaisalmer. So Kunal, if you could just bring you in, just got a quick question for you. So Kunal, are you there?
Yeah, hi there.
Hey Kunal. Glad to have you here. So just, what we spoke recently, about Rampur whiskey and how you have all the different cask experiments, and you even tasted Nasawa, which was the first of its kind in the world. So we live in a very social world, and we just want to know, for you as a brand ambassador, you've been out there, talking to customers. How do you think the story should be told, and how do you see the challenges in getting your story about Rampur and the USP, the Indianness, out to the world?
Yeah, thanks, Hemant, thanks for that. Yeah, what you guys are discussing is absolutely correct. When you are selling a product, you're not only selling a product, you're selling the story. All the customers, they love to hear the story behind the brand, how you're nurturing it, how you're making it, and what are the USPs, around the brand. For example, in industry like ours, where we are selling Indian single malt or Indian gin, we are competing against the stalwarts of the world like Scotch single malt, which have already have renowned footprints. Then you have the New World Whiskey, the Japanese single malts, and suddenly you have a category called Indian single malt. People are surprised. What is this? So here, one is the basic is communication. How you want to communicate Indian single malt. So over the period of time, we find these challenges. If you're participating in any of the whiskey shows, we are meeting customers, or we are at some retail level shop, we are doing master classes, or we are doing some tasting sessions, we're able to explain, we are able to put that passion behind this, and we are able to convince them why this is, what is this, why this is, where this is coming from, and what are their questions, how they need to be answered, and what are their inquisitiveness about the brand itself, and about why they need to purchase a Scotch single malt and why not an Indian single malt. You need to differentiate between them. And the basic challenge you have, for example, you're going at a retail level, a guy is just screening on various single malts, like unlike we do in India, and he would have particular set in mind. But if you don't tell him about what you have in store for us as a new brand, he will not come to know. I'll give you one real life example. I was one of the duty frees, I think so. It was in Dubai, if not mistaken. So there was a gentleman who was from an Eastern European country. He was trying to understand the difference between a Japanese single malt and this Indian single malt. Both come from Asia. So the guy at the store level just say, this is from Japan, this is from India, this is the origin, and that's the difference. And there's a $10 price difference. No, since I was there, so I took over the whole conversation on me. I think company should pay me for that. Sorry. So yeah, so I took over the whole conversation upon myself. I said, I was telling about Rampur. We have a USP here. We are totally Indian. We use North Indian barley. Again, your story from barley to finally bottling. We have a North Indian barley. We use Indian weather condition. We have water from the Himalayas, and we use Indian wine casks to mature to finish this whiskey. He was sold. He was just sold out, and we could sell 3 bottles up front to him. So these small nuances, since you're not physically present, and what you guys were discussing correctly, you are not present everywhere physically. Your representatives. I think there's some disturbance. I believe.
Could everyone just mute, please? Yeah. Kunal,
so yeah, so we are not present everywhere physically, and our representatives are not there physically. Like I said, I converted that customer from telling the story exact what are the USPs, how the things are made, what is the brand of all, he got sold off. So this is a basic challenge. One, as an industry, as a category, I would say, Indian single malt versus others. Then, communicating that direct contact with the customer, explaining about this, the process, the brand making, the USP. It's a huge challenge. And if you're physically present, yes. If not, what's the solution? I think we need to have certain kind of solution to kind of, nurture our way into that space.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Kunal. It was well said. It's kind of like, if you want to be in every store, and what's the solution for that? We need a Kunal in every store in the US and India and everywhere. But we're just moving on, this is very interesting because we've talked about how the brands want to tell their stories, which is kind of like a one-way conversation. So I'd just like to bring Hemant back in to talk about, how can we make this one-way conversation a very effective two-way conversation? Hemant, if you could.
Yeah, I just went on mute thinking that the noise was from my end. No worries. But yeah, thanks, Kunal. I think so. That was very interesting insight and a great story there in terms of how you took over for your brand. And I definitely think that the brand should pay you a bonus for that. But then that's my thought. but yeah, I think so. That's a very important point made there, Uday. As to how are we going to be able to convert this? There is lies the problem of actually communicating with the end customer and actually getting the message of your story across to them. And then how to take that story further in terms of engagement. How do we convert this, monologue to a dialogue? How do we ensure that we actually get a response back from the people, be able to absorb, what they are saying as well, optional, of course, and be able to start this channel of communication, Historically, I think so. It's been done very, very fragmented. It's not something that's been cohesive. It's not something that's, provides saying that it's a one-stop shop. You get the entire experience over here, and that's how the experience is built across. For example, I'm just making it easy for the people in the audience to actually relate to what I'm saying. You talk about a bottle, the maximum that you're going to be able to do on a bottle today, for example, is that you're going to be able to see a feedback email ID saying that, all right, for any complaints, please call on this number, or you can write to us. There's no story behind it. And now probably there's a little more information available through QR codes that's available today for some brands, etc. So that's there. But the whole dialogue, the bringing together the 360 degrees to get this feedback across in one place, to ensure that the story is told in one place, the product lying in one place. I think so all of these points make it a very, very difficult challenge that the brands today have to deal with. And I just think that there's a fundamental disconnect between, some of the stories or rather this disconnect is created because of the communication barriers that lie between what the brand is trying to say and what the consumers at the end is listening to and what they want to communicate back as well. And as a founder of a club who started off in India in 2011, where not too many people were very forthcoming, collecting demographic information was such a challenge. People would be so apprehensive about giving the telephone numbers to give, because they don't know as to how this information is going to be dealt with, because they don't see the other person at the other side of the story who is collecting this information. Is it a trustworthy source? Is it backed by security? Is it got adequate, cover to ensure that I don't have anything exposed on the internet, things like that. I think so that's a big challenge in terms of engagement and how do brands engage with customers. Uday, any more thoughts that you have that come to mind in terms of problems such as this?
Absolutely. I guess, we're just going back to what Kunal just said now, having a conversation and gauging what the customer wants and giving them what they want. It could be anything. It could be promotion. It could be how to make a cocktail. It could be, even connecting them to a forum like Smack, for example, where they can talk about whiskeys with like-minded people. So essentially what you're trying to do with this whole thing is you're trying to bring a stickiness and loyalty, right? So there really isn't anything like that right now. And like you said, it's very fragmented. How do we bring it together is a big question.
Right. I think that, it leads me into bringing one of the brand ambassadors, a very popular gentleman, Shilton. How are you doing, mate?
Hey,
all okay with you?
I'm good.
All right. So, Shilton, I have a very specific question as a brand ambassador. While we from the probably a little bit of on the periphery in terms of the actual industry, I think so you representing a brand, tell us about the different challenges that you face, because you've been on the road for most of the time, visiting different places. Of course, not during the pandemic, I hope not. But then you've always been out, you're meeting people, you're meeting your customers, you're meeting different probably retail stores. How do you deal with all of this?
Pretty much.
I mean,
yeah, it's pretty much you guys have covered it as well. Getting into different stores, and as Kunal just mentioned before, you can't be having hundreds of Kunals and hundreds of Shilton on the road, because if you look at the number of stores that you have today, and you can't be present in every store all the time. You can't be present at every whiskey festival all the time. Yes. What is missing up here is, as you said as well, Hemant, I mean, there are limitations that you can do on a label. There are limitations that you can do on the packaging. We do convey the message. We are storytellers. So what I was saying is, it's the same thing. There are limitations that you can do on the packaging. We convey the message. We're talking about food pairings. We're talking about cocktails that you can do with each expression. But you can't be putting up everything on a label. There is no enough space, or even if you have some booklets in there, how many people do actually take the time to do it? And today we live in a smart world, I say it. Everybody has got a smartphone. Things can take you straight away to a website and get more data, more information, more stories on it. So these are the challenges which are missing. I myself come across so many times that I have to actually cancel many activities or shows because I can't be there in both the places.
Right.
It's a very common thing. I'm sure guys like Kunal and Ashok on the road is also facing the same issues. But these are the challenges. So something which is like, as you said, QR code maybe is one of the option which could help. But the main challenges will be the same. You can't be having multiple persons. You can't be having multiple Kunal and multiple Shiltons everywhere, and we can't be having. There's no enough space on the label to put everything in.
I'm told by multiple people saying that they can't be two Shiltons for sure, Shilton. So that I can take it for guaranteed. I can assure you that that's what the market is saying. But yeah, I completely get your story about getting people, the feedback of everyone together, especially when you're out on the street. If there are multiple people actually telling you something, even collation of that information must be so difficult in terms of getting back to people, actually giving them the response that they're looking for. Even though that's the intent that you may have, it may be actually humanly not possible, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and this is something which is quite common for, I think, almost every brand as well.
Right.
And then for the brand, there are limitations that you can do. I mean, although you want to do that many activities at the same time, especially now, Christmas time, you want to be in every store standing and pouring, and talking about the brand, but you can't.
Right.
And of course,
True.
it is because of the pandemic, but otherwise you cannot do it anyways.
True. Thanks, Hilton. That was great insight. But yeah, I guess Uday and me have been speaking about the challenges, and we have to, I guess, now hand over to Malini, who will be able to take us through some of the solutions that are available and talk us through saying that what are the present solutions available to tackle these problems that we spoke about. Malini, over